I think there's just a whole host of really exciting things happening in the energy space. And one of the things that everybody in this panel and probably in this conference is committed to is making sure that folks aren't left behind. As we shift to a cleaner, more affordable energy economy in California, I think it brings up some really critical questions. How do we make sure that these opportunities get to the people that need them the most? Where is all this money going to come from? Are we spending it right? Are we doing it right? Are we developing programs and technologies and opportunities and rebate programs, et cetera, in the right way? And I think almost number one is, are we doing it fast enough? I mean, we're facing critical priorities, and we're being outpaced by technology. We're being outpaced by the impacts of climate change that we're feeling. And so to me, this is a really critical piece of the discussion. My name's Andy. I work with Promise Energy, and we focus on solar and sustainable solutions for multifamily affordable housing. We have an incredible panel here today, mostly of folks that run the Public Utility Commission, Southern California Edison, and our local utility, DWP, along with Michael Kadish from Grid Alternatives. So Grid works nationally, DWP works locally, Southern California Edison works through this whole region, and the California Public Utility Commission works statewide. So we have this interesting overlap between folks that serve this market, folks that develop and implement programs for this market at a variety of different regions. And so what I'd like to do for the shape of this panel is just to kind of toss out a few questions to our panelists and let everybody answer. We're going to do a couple rounds of that back and forth, and then we want to make sure that we're engaging you, our audience. I've been to Verde Exchange before. I know that there is at least as much brain power, talent, opportunity, and optimism in the audience as there is on stage at most of these panels, this one except. But I know that you guys have some important contributions to make, and I want to make sure that we have time for that. So we're just going to dive right in. And the first question is really going to be about our area, Los Angeles. This is a very unique area. We have the most disadvantaged communities. You might hear that, it's the term DAC in this panel. We have a large number of what we call LMI, low and moderate income populations in this area. And we want to make sure that they don't get left behind. But we have this interesting overlap between state and local, bureaucracies, if you will, or let's say organizational drivers for creating opportunity for folks. So let's just start with Los Angeles. Are we doing what needs to be done? And we're going to start with you, Bill.
No, we're not doing what needs to be done, but we are taking action to make sure that what needs to be done gets done. So one of the things that I talked about earlier at the plenary very briefly was the initiative that our board voted unanimously on in the summer of 2016 called the Equity Metrics Data Initiative. And it's an enterprise-wide system that is intended to identify disparities, which we saw in the solar rebates, where we saw 0.1% of the solar rebates going to some of the poorer areas in the cities, and the vast majority of the solar rebates going into others. So apart from changing the design of those programs that had already begun prior to our getting onto the board, as one of Mayor Garcetti's appointees, we thought that it would be good to take a holistic approach to equity and try to imbue it and infuse it throughout the enterprise. So it's a four-part initiative, and it covers power and water reliability, number one. So that's the SAIFI and SAIDI and other types of indexes that I have no idea what they stand for, other than something about system reliability and has something to do with reliability and
that doesn't sound important.
on the power side, as well as our water reliability breakages, et cetera. The second item is procurement. LADWP is a public utility. The investor-owned utilities, like Edison, like PG&E, like SDG&E, and other even non-electric utilities, have been under something called PUC, Public Utilities Commission Order Number 156, General Order 156, and that's an overarching mandate that the investor-owned utilities are required to operate under, where they have to report on and set targets for diversity in different classifications of businesses, women-owned, minority-owned, I think the most recent one is LGBTQ-owned. At LADWP, we had no such real classification inventorying on our procurement at all because we weren't required to. We asked for it in our RFPs, but we weren't keeping track of it, nor were we tracking whether what was promised was actually delivered, which is actually a big problem when you have the beauty contests and everybody shows up with the Rainbow Coalition, and literally the rainbow and the rainbow, and they end up, delivering something that doesn't look like a rainbow when the actual work gets done. So the only way that I thought that could be rectified was through a thorough accounting, equity accounting, and just as with the Academy Awards and other higher profile institutions, nobody really wants to look the same. I mean, and that could be, everybody having college degrees, everybody having the same educational attainment, everybody having the same gender, et cetera. So we did, the procurement was the second area that we looked at, and that we're going to be reporting on. The equity metrics reports are due every February and every August. So we aligned them with we actually took the idea of RPS reports that we do, which I think we do every quarter or semi-annually, and we decided to make them in alignment with other reports that our board receives, so that the board would receive this, and it would be a permanent way of changing the culture and the management. The third end was employment, and LADWP actually has quite a diverse workforce, but when you drill down into the workforce and look at different job categories, you see, for instance, in upper level power management, it's much less diverse than we have even in, for instance, our joint system, our sustainability group, certainly our clerical staff. So looking at, and the focus for a number of reasons, because the greatest disparity lies here, is on, we're actually launching a separate gender equity initiative that Commissioner Jill Banks-Barad is working on, and Commissioner Aura Vasquez, whom we're very happy to have here grace us with her presence. And that gender equity initiative, we have 500 linemen, for instance, and only one line woman. So there's nothing the matter with that per se, but that can lead to a culture that isn't necessarily healthy. And you don't have to have been around the past 3 or 4 months to see what happens when a lot of the same people end up generating a boys' club type of atmosphere. So that's the third area. The fourth area is probably the most complicated area, but the most interesting area, and that's project siting and services. So that touches everything from stormwater capture sites to where we have P3 type of public-private partnership green up projects on top of our stormwater capture, to electric vehicle chargers. We noticed that the electric vehicle chargers were congregating to certain areas, and they were going to the highest, most affluent zip codes. In fact, the top 10 zip codes had about 80–90% of the public electric vehicle chargers. But interestingly, the electric vehicles, there were electric vehicles we did an inventory, and it took several months for me to get this information. We had to get it from DMV. The electric vehicle registrations, plug-ins, are actually dispersed quite around the city. There are 30 or 40 electric vehicles in Watts zip code. There are 30 or 40 in just about every single South LA zip code. So we thought that the perception of disparity needed to be aligned with real disparity first to determine whether any correlation actually led to causation. And if there was a correlation causation alignment, then we would implement a remedial plan. So what we did with the equity metrics, interestingly, because we're a public utility, is we aligned the equity metrics with our corporate rate metrics. And so equity is not in that diversity or EEO office that's in the corner of the building, like on the second floor, which we all know. Come on, call a whatever. We all know how that happens. When the economy goes down, what's one of the first things that gets cut? The non-revenue items. So Marcy Edwards, who a lot of people know in this room, and she's a prudent, utility manager. She's the one who came up with the idea of putting the equity metrics in the CFO's office. So equity metrics is in the C-suite. So the managers that are responsible for the different equity categories are going to be judged and graded on their performance, and it's going to go directly to there. And when was the last time the CFO's office ever cut their budget? It's so it was one way of making sure that there was budget for it to implement as well. Yeah.
So you guys are baking in these type of metrics into your core processes and making sure that your workforce, your procurement, and your customers are taking advantage of some of these opportunities.
That's
what it
right.
sounds like.
That's right. And one of the big things on the equity metrics in the customer siting and location is the community solar program, which I can talk about later. But that's kind of morphing into a shared solar and possible net metering type of situation.
That sounds great. Yeah, let's touch back on that. So I want to give Mike a chance to respond to this question around clean energy access for all. Los Angeles, are we doing what we need to do?
Sure. So thank you, Andy. My name is Michael Kadish. I'm the executive director of Grid Alternatives Greater Los Angeles, which is the LA affiliate of a national nonprofit that started here in California that's now also in Washington, D.C., and Colorado, and has a tribal program and an international program. And what we do is we bring the benefits of renewable energy technology to underserved communities. And in LA, that's principally been through single-family installs that we've done where we try to size systems to be about 80 to 90% of usage. These are all for families that are below 80% area median income. They all live in disadvantaged communities. And as Andy knows, LA is really ground zero for this issue in California. Half of all the disadvantaged communities designated by the state are in LA County. Half of those are in the city of Los Angeles. So when we talk about disadvantaged communities, we're not talking about some faraway place. We're talking about where we live. We actually did an install for my next door neighbor, for example, as well. And we also do multifamily work. We've been installing on affordable housing, which is something that Andy knows a ton about. We've been starting to do commercial work for other nonprofits. And we use a job training model where trainees and volunteers both come out and they learn on the job real skills, and then we help them get job placements. And last year we placed 86 people into the solar industry who had come out with us from schools like LA Trade Tech, our programs such as Homeboy Industries that are our partners. And here in LA, it's really interesting. I mean, I'm really honored to be on this panel with the people from the major utilities and the CPUC, because we are kind of an implementer of a lot of these equity programs. So what we see is we really got our start and grew as a nonprofit working with the SASH program, which is the Single Family Affordable Solar Housing Program. And we're the administrator of that across the state, and that's going to go on until 2021, and that's through the CPUC. SOMA, which is going to be the Solar on Affordable Multifamily Housing, or Solar on, so many acronyms, this is going to be acronym soup for everybody, sorry. That's going to bring $1 billion over the next 10 years, and unfortunately, LADWP is not a part of that. But there is also programs through the California Climate Investments, better known as Cap and Trade. And the LIWIP program, which is the Low Income Weatherization Program, is putting also millions and millions of dollars. And we just did a study, I think, that I just want to call attention to because it's very important. And it highlights, I think, what to me is the crucial issue for access and equity in terms of solar here in Los Angeles today, which is virtual net metering. If we do not have virtual net metering, what it means is that people who live in apartment buildings, which half of LA does, half of LA are renters, cannot access the benefits of solar, even if the solar is on the roof of the building. So you need virtual net metering in order to divide those benefits and put them on people's bills. And this isn't a pie in the sky thing. This is actually something that happens in Southern California, Edison territory. We just did a big project in Santa Ana that had virtual net metering. And now we're even, I would say, at a point where the urgency is greater because this program, the incentive is over twice as big if you have virtual net metering. So if we don't get this together in LA, what is going to happen is we're going to leave $117 million of funding from the state of California that's meant to do this very thing. And not only is it meant to do this very thing, there's an environmental justice prerogative. The people who are meant to benefit through cap and trade, right, are the people who live in polluted areas, who live by freeways, who live by shipping, who live by the airports, the people who live in Pacoima and Boyle Heights and Wilmington and those parts of our city. And without virtual net metering, the people that live in affordable housing can't access this program and this money, so that we will end up steering solar to the people who need its economic benefits the least, rather than those that have paid the greatest price in terms of pollution and in terms of, you know, really creating the funding of the cap and trade program. So, in short, I think this is a very exciting time here in LA, and really look forward to hearing everyone's thoughts. Thank you.
So we definitely have some overlapping jurisdictions. We have some gaps and holes. We have some ways that we want to work to try and fill all these. So let's turn to Leanne really quickly. It's from the PUC. Let's get a statewide perspective on energy equity and access.
Okay, so the PUC regulates, as you know, investor-owned utilities. So we have about 80% of the electric customers in the state are served by one of our IOUs, and pretty much all natural gas customers are served by one of our IOUs. So we think of equity in terms of 5 themes: access, affordability, environmental sustainability and environmental justice, economic prosperity, and consumer protection. So originally, sort of the way we have thought about energy equity has kind of evolved over time, because our programs really started with focusing on low and moderate income customers. And over time, that has expanded as the legislature has asked us to think about not just individual customers, but also disadvantaged communities and how we can protect those communities. So on the theme of access, I think a lot of people don't realize that there are some parts of the state that don't even have access to some basic services. My former colleague, Commissioner Sandoval, was very involved in extending electricity to some tribal areas up on the North Coast that until a few years ago did not have consistent electricity service. Another one of my current colleagues, Commissioner Guzman Aceves, has a proceeding in the San Joaquin Valley where there are communities that were never hooked up to any kind of natural gas service. And so those customers have been using expensive electric service to, heat their homes or propane, and never had the opportunity to take advantage of lower cost energy options. And as we're thinking about kind of transitioning our energy mix, that proceeding is looking at ways that maybe they could even kind of skip over the natural gas step and look at community solar and other solutions to provide more affordable energy in those areas. There's been a lot of conversation at this conference about transportation electrification, working on trying to make sure that all communities have the opportunity to obtain electric vehicles. In our 2016 approval, we approved $200 million of EV infrastructure, and 10 to 15% of that is required to be located in disadvantaged communities. We recently approved numerous pilots with our IOUs for charging infrastructure, and a couple of examples. San Diego Gas and Electric is working on a $4 million project to site park and ride EV charging stations in disadvantaged communities. Also, San Diego Gas and Electric working on another project to partner with fleet delivery services to support electric vehicle fleets in disadvantaged communities. So we're looking at those kinds of opportunities to spread those expenditures throughout. Affordability, The PUC has long-standing programs to make energy more affordable. The California Alternative Rates for Energy program provides 30 to 35% discounts on electric bills and 20% discounts on gas bills for customers whose income is 200% of federal poverty levels. There's the Family Electric Rate Assistance Program, which reaches those who do not have the income levels to qualify for the CARE program, make a little bit more, but still need some assistance with their energy bills. We have the Energy Savings Assistance Program to provide energy efficiency upgrades to qualifying low-income households. And then, of course, we have our multifamily solar programs that we were talking about earlier. Environmental sustainability and environmental justice. SB 350 mandated us to kick off the integrated resources planning proceeding and specifically directed us to put a high priority on disadvantaged communities. And so one of the things we've been thinking about is what is the best way to do that. And so we are, our proposed decision that we're going to be voting on in February will provide some direction to our utilities for steps they need to take when they are siting facilities. They're entering into contracts with energy providers. What kind of due diligence are they going to need to understand the energy equity issues in areas where they're looking to procure energy. We're looking at air pollutant impacts. As we look at our whole suite of resources, one of the pieces of analysis we're undertaking is, as we look at our current gas fleet, where is that gas fleet located? What kind of activity is that fleet undertaking? How many starts? What is the air pollutant impact of those starts? And in a long-term planning sense, is there a way that we can start looking at reducing the number of starts and thinking about moving inefficient, more polluting plants off of the system and meeting our local and system reliability needs with resources that are cleaner and more efficient? We have, workforce development is kind of a key component of our programs, and I think Michael knows a little bit more about that than I do, so I'll let him talk to that. But we have both opportunities for our programs to result in jobs, but as Bill was mentioning, we have our supplier diversity program, our GO 156 program, which allows businesses that may traditionally come from underserved communities to have the opportunity to gain contracts with our utilities. And I will say our electric utilities and our gas utilities have absolutely been the leaders in this area, and they have consistently met or exceeded their supplier diversity goals and have resulted in creating solid jobs and opportunities for entrepreneurs to really be successful. And then lastly, consumer protection has always been part of our mission. A lot of folks don't know we have a whole staff of people, our consumer affairs branch, that answer the phone every day and hear complaints and concerns. And we really work to try to get as much information as we can from those individuals who are working the phone, so that when we make policy decisions, we are taking into account some of the concerns that we are hearing directly from the community and try to build that into our decision making.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Caroline, SoCal Edison, how are you guys doing here in LA?
Yeah, so if you think about LA a little bit more broadly than the city of LA and think about it from a county perspective, we serve, quite a bit of the county and share much of that space with LADWP around the city. So I think when we think about first of all, I think it's really important to talk about, or at least acknowledge the fact that there has been a lot of progress. And it's due to efforts and programs and policies that have been in place decades ago, and California continues to build on those. So as we think about now going out to 2030 with the extension of the cap and trade program last year, with the addition of looking at air quality in conjunction with going after climate, I think we do have lots of opportunities to think about what we can do here in the region in the next 12 years. And I think that's the daunting thing, is that we only have 12 years to hit a very ambitious target of 40% below 1999 levels. So we have a paper that we put out last fall, the Clean Energy and Electrification Pathway paper, which talks about one way we think that the state could go about achieving that goal while also addressing clean air, and that is to, of course, clean the grid and then leverage that cleaner grid in more areas of the economy. So we call for 80% carbon-free electricity by 2030. As you all know, it's a 50% standard today, so it is a 50% renewable standard today. So it's a significant increase from the current goal, and it's like a doubling of where we are today. We're about 40% carbon-free in the state. So a lot to get done in 12 years. And then leveraging, like I said, that essentially carbon-free grid in more aspects of the economy, and particularly in transportation, which is the biggest contributor both to climate change as well as to the poor air quality in Southern California and the Central Valley. So we call for up to 7 million passenger vehicles by 2030, and then significant electrification in the medium heavy-duty space, as well as the beginning at building electrification. So space and water heating going electric as well, up to like 30% of buildings in 2030 being electric space and water heating. So it's an ambitious program, but I think if we start now and get policies in place, the state could achieve those goals at the lowest cost, is what and it's not necessarily the only way, but we just put forward what we thought was a pathway that was at the least cost to all customers. It's really important, of course, through that transition, that electricity remain affordable. If you're going to leverage electricity in more aspects of the economy, it's really important that that product become and stay affordable to customers. It's an essential service today, and what we see in 2030 is that electricity is even more essential. If you're going to leverage what is already in existence, that grid touches almost every home and business. I think there's work to do to expand that into more areas of the state, but if you can do that and then modernize the grid to accommodate all the choices that customers are making, including solar and electric vehicles, storage, and the technologies that are coming forward that we don't even know about, but that customers will adopt. I think that's what we see as a real opportunity for LA and for the rest of the state.
Absolutely, yeah. We're hearing a constellation and a convergence of so many different issues: workforce issues, equity issues, access issues, the built environment, transportation. There sounds like there's a heavy lift here and a fairly tight time frame to make this happen. So why, help us understand, why is getting this into the hands of the disadvantaged communities and the low and moderate income folks in our state, why is that so important to meeting these goals?
Can I just speak up on one thing that I answered? Because I always like to set the bar high. And what I didn't do is to, one of the things I think that DWP does not do well is to talk about all the equity that it has done, whether it was the energy efficiency, the lighting programs, the numerous other programs, and also meeting, I think we've met our 40% target. We met it 13 years early, so some of these utilities that are still chasing after that number, we'll either have met it or we'll have met it once we get off of the, fully off of the coal. So that was a message kind of that I think is not just positive, but it's something that really needs to be said. In terms of the work with the communities that are just not as resourced, I think it's a marketing thing. It's about speaking in a culturally fluent way, like Irma Munoz does, as the chair of the Regional Water Board and chair of the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, It's talking about in the right vocabulary. It's talking with people and not at them. It's saying not them and you, like they do this, they do that. The people that don't have a college degree, the 70% who don't have a college degree, the 60% of LA's population that's Latino, that you'd never think that looking at a lot of things at LADWP. That engagement, that level of engagement is necessary in order for ratepayers to want to support the further investments in the infrastructure, which are going to need to be made, need to be made anyway to meet the longer term Paris and other type of climate goals. So.
Yeah.
So,
Michael, or
I was just gonna just add on really briefly that I think Bill's right that, you know, sort of getting out and talking. And on top of that is listening. Because I think one of the challenges is, you know, we talk a lot about how do we get sort of resources into communities. Well, we need to find out from the community,
Right.
you know, what are your hurdles? What are you seeing?
Mm-hmm.
So SB 350 required the PUC and the CEC to form an advisory council, and we are currently, we just took applications and are currently making those selections and trying to get sort of interaction and trying to understand sort of what the barriers are and make sure we understand them and are addressing them.
yeah, are you guys going to be on that?
I don't know, maybe, hopefully. But I would just say, I think, you know, what Commissioner Funderburg said is critical. And, you know, there's a lot of, like, California is so good at setting goals.
We like you guys, by the way.
Thank you, sir.
We think, no, if I had somebody to hold up as an example of somebody who hustles harder for less and does it for the right thing, I'd hold you up and your company up. And we just need to keep on cutting the barriers to make sure that multifamily homeowners can get the access to these renewables that they need to get more of. So I just wanted to make sure that people
Thank
knew
you very
about
much.
that.
And I don't really need to say anything now. No, but I will say this, just to say.
Partners is everything.
Right. These goals, just to be, like, California does such a good job setting goals, right? Of when are we going to get off renewables, onto renewables, when are we going to do this and that? And the implementation, you're not going to meet any of these goals unless it's for everybody, unless everybody's included. And I think the cultural fluency point is so key. I mean, honestly, I kind of kid with people about this, but, like, what flies at the Whole Foods parking lot, you know, in Santa Monica is not what's going to work in Southgate. And just in terms of, not just in terms of literally the language, but in terms of why. People are not, you know, why do people make these choices? Saving money and being a conservationist in terms of, like, making do with what one has is a lot more resonates a lot more in a lot of the communities we work in than let's do this because Leonardo DiCaprio took a, you know, Prius to the Oscars or whatever, which is great,
Right.
but that doesn't really matter, to a lot of people. So I just think there's a reason of, if you're a policymaker, it matters, and then there's an environmental justice reason, which I tried to say before. I mean, really, you're talking to the people. Like, I was just on a bus tour in Pacoima as part of something where, you know, that's a community that, you know, there's a power plant there, there's an airport there, there's not proper side. When it rains, it just floods out in the streets because there's not proper, you know, drainage. These are the very communities where state money should go to because they're the really suffering. And speaking of the wildfires, you know, the wildfires that happened in our city here happened, you know, up there. So there's an environmental justice argument, and there's just an effectiveness argument as well.
And I'll just add, I think, you know, about a third of our customers are on an income qualified rate. So the cost matters to them, and I think as we think about these technologies and that they're being adopted within the state of California, we do need to have opportunities for them to also adopt those technologies. We formed a Clean Energy Access Working Group last year, and just as we've seen with, so I think you'll see the utility industry evolve. I think before, customers were residential customers, commercial customers, industrial customers, agricultural customers, and that was about the extent of the the slicing of customers. And I think now, because the choices that customers are making, you have to think about them very differently. And even in the EJ community, their needs and wants are very different depending on their location. And so in some cases, it may be about a power plant that's located nearby. In other cases, it's, for us, a lot of it's around the traffic and along those major highway corridors and trying to eliminate the pollution that's coming from the vehicles. And then in Long Beach, often it's around the port because it's a huge source of air pollution. And how can we, as a utility, help to clean the port, help the port clean itself up, and then work with the community. So, and then I would just add one more thing as part of the workforce development, because we often say as we go out in the community and do volunteer work, you can't be what you can't see. If people in these communities don't see people of color working, installing solar panels or storage systems or being linemen, they don't think about those opportunities to go into the utility industry or the solar industry. And so I think it's really important that we see projects across the diverse area of Southern California in order for those communities, for all people to see the opportunities that there are out there for jobs in that space. And we are certainly, as we think about the future and looking at our workforce, which is aging, every day, always looking for how do we recruit new talent into our workforce, and that is also part of the communities that we serve. So.
Yeah, I think there's some really critical issues in terms of there's just a broad spectrum. This is not just solar or electric vehicles. It's just a huge confluence of different factors here. I think, just a side note, as we're talking here, I think this is really interesting. If you talk about listening to communities, but we're also talking about a rapidly evolving future that even us techie energy green geeks don't quite understand exactly the impacts of blockchain contracts for PPAs or virtual power plants, et cetera. So like, how are these communities, how are we engaging them in that vision of what a clean, affordable, equitable energy infrastructure could be? How do we get that idea?
I think it's a great question, because there's a lot of talk. I mean, I think if you listen to the governor's state of the California speech, it's like there's a huge economic opportunity, and say, unlike the internet boom, how do we make sure that this is something that really everyone can participate in, and how do we create good paying jobs that are blue collar jobs that are going to stay here, that can't be exported. I mean, it's really a big challenge in our time. And that's why I'm really happy that we work with the community colleges, the adult LAUSD schools. We have a whole program with people that are coming out of prison, and we take them out on the roof. And look, I've seen people who have gone from incarceration to starting their own successful residential solar businesses, which is pretty amazing when you think of that kind of journey. And it's just critical to make sure that we have a robust workforce and that people get the training that they need. And I think workforce development is it's a hot topic, but it's hard to make sure that people are getting real skills that the marketplace wants, and it's hard to make sure that they're getting good jobs. We try our best to make sure that people are getting jobs that are paying a living wage. We also feel that we're not in a position to tell someone this job's not good enough for you. But really, I'd love to see people get on a path to be able to join IBEW. We have a good track record of putting people into the union. I think the training people get at the Electrical Training Institute is pretty damn awesome. That's one of the best places that I think there is in the whole country, certainly in the region. And I think it's such an imperative to make sure that the benefits, it's like we can't on the one hand bemoan income inequality and the centralization of wealth in our country, and on the other hand not do what we can to make sure the benefits of this boom don't spread out so that hundreds of thousands of people benefit rather than just a few thousand.
Yeah. Well, we do have one question. I think we've touched on this a lot. It's sort of the money question, right? Yeah, we heard this morning, this is a $1 trillion economy just in LA County and Orange County together. So it feels like that's a lot of money. We should have the money to be able to do this. Do we feel like we have the money? Do we feel like we're spending it in the right way? Is it making a difference? Let's talk just a little bit about that, if folks don't mind. Maybe Leanne?
Okay, it's a sensitive topic at the PUC.
Tell me about that.
Well, you asked a question at the beginning about why do we want to make sure everyone has access, and And I think the reality is, if you look at, some of these funds come from cap and trade, right? But some of these funds end up coming from the ratepayers, right? Which means that you want to make sure that everybody has the buy-in. Everybody's like, okay, we get that the ratepayers are all putting their money in a pot, and it's gonna provide access to new technologies. It's going to provide access to transportation electrification. So you need to make sure that people feel like they have that access, so that the benefit that everybody's paying into gets spread to everybody who in the community. And so I think that's a key goal.
And I think just one thing that happens with technology, and you see it, is that the early adopters of the technology tend to consistently be higher income people, whether that's solar or electric vehicles or whatever. So sometimes there's this myth that's, I find that out there, it's like, oh, like the ratepayers, like there's many, many millions of lower income working class ratepayers who pay into these systems. Right. And when you look at, say, the EV rebates, I mean, so many of them in the beginning, before the legislation change, went to people in the very highest, most wealthy counties, to give them a break on buying a Tesla, which is sort of in the very beginning. Maybe that's, a good thing to kind of get it kicking off. We could debate that or not, but I think it makes sense as time goes on that you're taking and making sure, hey, how are these incentives being spent so that we're making sure that there's a broad-based approach and that we're making sure we get the most bang for the buck, because moving somebody from a really fuel-efficient car to an electric car isn't the same as moving somebody from, an 88 Buick to,
Right.
A used Leaf, right?
I think, and that brings up a really important point, right? You guys are probably all familiar with this, right? The utilities, government in general, tends to offer an incentive. Like, here is a check. You do something good, I will give you some money. Almost invariably, it's not 100%. And partly that's by design. We want people to have some buy-in. I was talking earlier about how hard it is to give away free stuff and how little people value free stuff. And so typically these programs are designed to give a chunk and then you engage with your chunk. Well, great. If you don't have the chunk to engage with, if you're lower income or you don't have that opportunity to get that buy-in that's required, then that's a flawed model, and that's not going to spread this access to the people that we wanted. So what is another vehicle, for instance, that will allow, without just giving away free cars to people, or what is a program that gets buy-in but also gets it to where it needs to be?
Well, I think that one of the things that needs to be looked at is how can you front load? I know that one of the things that DWP is doing is front loading rebate so that the customer never has to come out of pocket. In other words, they enter into some type of enforceable agreement, and then a third-party entity comes in and fills in the gap that the ratepayer would ordinarily have to pay. I have a saying. It's very simple. They will always be they until they become we. And that's really what it's about. And when Commissioner Vasquez enters into rooms and lights them up like nobody else can do and talks about the why. Why are we doing this? We're doing this about we. It's not about they. So whenever we talk about they, those low-income people, those this, those that, then automatically our frame is totally skewed. It's messed up. And as policymakers, it's going to be hurt. So what we need to do is develop things like these front-loading things that I know that we're doing at DWP, where the rebates can be, the design is problematic. Sure. That's the problem. The design is problematic. It inherently favors the big guy, whether the big guy is, has more money, has more power, has more social capital, has more whatever. But the person on the margin's getting hosed. And I think that that's what this is about, is just making sure that fairness applies and fairness is done for all the ratepayers. One of the things I get tired of hearing is, oh, well, what about the ratepayers? Well, who the friggin' heck, who are you to say the ratepayers? What do they look like? What do those ratepayers look like? Well, I can tell you what they look like. They have a lot of cash. Doesn't matter what color they are, what nationality they are, what ethnicity they are, and what gender they are. They got a lot of money because they have the resources to call City Hall, call whatever, call the CEO of this, call the governor, and make sure that they get taken care of. I know, we all know, because we live in those neighborhoods. Well, I think that what we need to do is kind of think about what we can do for us and think of them as us and not think of them as them.
I'll just add one more thing.
Yeah.
I think there is, as you pointed out, a lot of money between the state, between utility programs, et cetera. And I do think one way, which I've seen improvement here, is try to leverage those dollars together. So oftentimes, someone comes in with a program and it's like, I have information about Grid's program, but then they don't pair it with energy efficiency programs of the utility and the savings programs of the utility and maybe a program at AQMD. And so I think a lot of it has to be, how can we collectively work together so that that one customer gets all the information at one time and can understand all the different opportunities that he or she may have. I think that's one. I do see an improvement in that space. I think there's more improvement that can be made. And also I think we do have programs, and I put up a list of there, and they're all very discrete programs. I do think as we think about going forward towards the 40% below 99 levels, we need to think about how can those programs be more of a pot that can be dispersed, focusing on what that community needs, rather than thinking about it all socialized as one state. And the communities definitely are different, and the needs of those communities are different. And the way that our programs work today isn't able to necessarily reflect and address those needs in a very rapid manner.
It's definitely a challenge, and I think we're bringing up some really good points here about, us versus them, we and they. I want to make sure that we have time to include all of us here in the room with any ideas or suggestions we have, but I have one kind of out-of-the-box question that I like to ask folks. We just take a step back for a minute. Imagine you're my 5-year-old daughter with her witch hat on and her magic wand. If you had a magic wand, and briefly, one thing to expand clean, affordable energy to every Californian, if you could pick one thing, and it could be magical, what would that be? Let's start with Caroline.
All right, so one of the things we also often say at Edison is that anything can be fixed with time and money. So I guess with my magic wand, if I couldn't get world peace, then I would say more money to expand and more quickly address the gap for all.
Yeah, money I think is not as big a problem as time sometimes.
I know, but we don't have more time.
Yeah.
We have 2030, so you have 12 years, you can't get more
That
time,
is
so
time
more
machine.
money
Okay.
to
Michael.
meet it.
I'm going to go with a widespread, affordable, easily accessible community solar program that any renter in the state of California could sign up for and get a reduction in their bill and get cheap renewable energy.
All right.
Okay, I'm going to go with kind of the world peace version, which is I wish the rest of the country would come with us, because if you think about all the resources in the West that we could access that would make it more affordable and more efficient for us to meet these aggressive goals, if we didn't have to worry about whether or not if we work with Wyoming and Utah, are they going to go off in some crazy direction and have some kind of coal standard? Like if every state sort of had the same perspective on climate change that we have, we would be unstoppable in terms of meeting these goals, and in an affordable way where individual customers wouldn't have to stress out about their bills.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Bill?
So I'm going to say what my talking points say, then I'm going to say what I think. So local power, local control is very important for DWP, and because it's already met some targets, it doesn't want to get stuck with others by being clumped in with others. Now, what I think actually is fairness, period. Just think about that. Think about the step-up exercise in Freedom Riders, if you've ever done it. If you've ever been to prison, if you've ever talked to people that you never talked to in your social silo, think about those and think about how we get to the end point of making sure that those people who are part of us are treated fairly.
Excellent. And folks in the audience, magic wands, questions, Burning concerns? What are we thinking out there? Too many decisions? Okay. Who has a question? Okay. I'll let you think about it for a second. Well, I think it's been really interesting to hear from everybody. We obviously have a lot of different issues here. This is not a one-size-fits-all problem. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution. It's definitely going to take all of us working together. But I think it's really important to include this when we talk about how excited we are about this green future, to make sure that everybody's being engaged in that. So, any other questions out there? You guys need coffee, or at least a break. So, yes.
I don't know if I have a question, but I think that change starts within each of the organizations and entities. There needs to be a drastic culture change. Because if you keep doing the same thing you've been doing for the last 5 or 10 years, you're going to get the same result. The truth is that our demographics have changed, and I believe that we're always going to translate brochures and whatnot. The term normal, it doesn't mean anything to most people of color. That's a white man's term. And I'm telling you this because this is what I do for a living. I don't talk to folks till, for example, when you say, my uncle last week told me, I just bought a brand new car. And I was so excited for him. And then when he showed me, it was a used car. But to him, it was brand new. So for him to even think about buying an electric car is like, and I said, why didn't you go electric? And he says, no, how am I going to change the oil? I know what it's going to cost the maintenance for the cars that I've driven. So you've got to ask really basic questions, because that is what they understand, not talking down to them, but understanding them more than we want them to understand us. I mean, that's the bottom line, folks, and I think that it really depends on how are you courageous enough to start changing the cultures of the entities that you lead. I lead Los Angeles Regional Water Quality Control Board, which is a regulatory agency in San California, and I changed that culture. Why? Because I started listening to folks. Why? Because I started asking questions that nobody dared ask because we're afraid of the answers. So that is where I think we need to go. So I want to ask the folks up there, except for Michael, and Michael I think has got it, but do you think that you're changing the cultures within your entities? Because that's what it's going to take.
Well, Bill definitely spoke to that in terms of the equity metrics, but Leanne or Caroline, do you want to take
Yeah.
a stab at that?
We're trying. We really are. Like I was saying earlier, we're trying to listen more, trying to get out into the community more. One of our commissioners sort of insisted to all of us, we need to go and do more meetings out in the public, not like formal commission meetings, which we try to do some of those around the state, but also just get out and have evening community meetings and just be out there meeting people. And she has challenged us to do that more. And so we are definitely planning on doing that more. So we're trying.
Are you encouraging your IOUs to adopt that approach?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I think it is a change, right? And it is like turning a big ship. But I
Yeah.
do think that we are committed to our communities and recognize that we do need to listen more to our communities and what their needs are. And so we're trying to do more of that. That was a reason why we formed this Clean Energy Access Working Group, was to hear from our communities and do that on a more regular basis, and to get their input to some of the ideas that we have around solar, around storage, around EVs, to make sure that we were meeting their needs and getting their input to make sure that it wasn't let us come tell you about our program. Instead, let us talk about what should a program be and go collectively to the commission.
All right.
What we should do is make food trucks information trucks. Go to neighborhoods like Urban Smoke Up and speak in languages and terms of what they can understand, how it's better for environment. Everyone wants a clean neighborhood. So just go in those lines. But transform a food truck to an information truck.
I like that. On every corner.
I was thinking, why don't we have an EV lottery?
Add the information.
People love the lottery. They spend a lot of money buying tickets. So what if the prize is you get an EV? And then it's kind of a combination of people buy in, but then there's luck, but then it's exciting. You get an EV, you get it out to the communities. Just an idea, throwing it out there. This is Verde Exchange 2018. We're open to all new ideas. So that's about all the time we have today for this particular panel. Thank you, everybody, for coming. If anybody has any questions you want to come forward, please let us know. Thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you.